If you look at the 2010 decade, you will notice how one team consistently dominated the league. The Golden State Warriors were immortal. They were unstoppable. That franchise broke so many records in such a short period of time, winning 3 NBA titles in 4 years, drafting and building some of the greatest players of our generation, and breaking records we thought would never be broken. The Warriors were so dominant that from the 2009-10 season until the 2018-19 season, they won 505 games. To put it into perspective, there were 820 games. If they won 505 games, that means they won approximately 61% of games in that decade. But there was one team that almost took over their throne. The 2017-18 Houston Rockets were incredible. They had plenty of talent and skill that had never been seen before. They played so well and were inches away from the NBA Finals. If you're asking me, that Rockets team was the most incredible NBA team that has never won the Finals. And today, we will look at this team from a closer view to see just how great they were. Let's start off by looking at the team's roster and staff to see what they were working with. Looking at the starting lineup, it was scary. They had Chris Paul at point guard, Harden at the 2, Trevor Ariza at small forward, Ryan Anderson at power forward, and Clint Capella. We'll get to Harden and CP3 in a bit. Let's look at the 3 other guys in the lineup for now, like Trevor Ariza. Now, Ariza has always been an interesting player. He wasn't a guy who can necessarily carry a team, nor was he a guy who did all the light work. Ariza was a versatile shooter from 3 and also played respectable defense. He was also a bit of a scorer from time to time. All in all, Ariza was a decent fit for the Rockets. Looking at Ryan Anderson, he was an extremely underrated big man for this team. Ryan Anderson was no ordinary power forward. Most big men in the league that season were weak shooters. But Ryan, on the other hand, was a shooting machine. His three-point percentage throughout his entire career was 38%, which is good for a guy like Ryan. Anderson also had high IQ on the court, as he was good at passing, had nice footwork, and worked well inside the post. The biggest flaw in Anderson's game was defending. His defensive win share was always around 1 and was once over 2 in his career. Defense wasn't really his thing, but he was still a gem for the Rockets. And the final guy in the starting lineup besides the stars was Clint Capella. Capella had everything you wanted from a center. He was a young buck who just started his career, meaning he had a long way to go in terms of consistency and progression. He was a bucket in the paint, as he averaged anywhere from 12 to 16 points a game throughout his career. In Houston before the 2017-18 season, it was around 12 to 13. He can grab boards, as he can very well average 10 rebounds a night. And he was a ferocious blocker who averaged 1 to 2 blocks per game. Capella was probably the biggest gem on that Rockets team. His role was a lot bigger than people might have thought. And then we obviously come to the stars. No need to dive too deep, as we already know how dominant these players are. Chris Paul was at his peak at this point in his NBA career, and James Harden was just getting started in terms of averaging 30 points per game. As for other valuable assets, you had some good pieces like Eric Gordon, an underrated shooter, Gerald Green, a decent shooter and a ferocious dunker, PJ Tucker, a well-balanced forward who is addicted to shoes, and Nene, a decent center. As for the coaching staff, Mike D'Antoni was their head coach. D'Antoni was looked at as one of the greatest coaches in the 2010s. The man was an elite offensive coach. When it came to plays, he was purely focused on the time. In Phoenix, he invented the iconic play 7 seconds or less. The goal was to score the ball in a maximum time of 7 seconds. D'Antoni kept this playstyle in mind when joining Houston. He mentioned in an interview how in a playoff series against Utah, it turned into 16 seconds or less. D'Antoni clearly had a good vision of how to play good offense. But defense, on the other hand, well, we'll get to that later on. The Houston Rockets had the greatest season in franchise history in the 2017-18 season. They finished the season going 65-17. They finished first in their division, first in the conference, and had the best record in the league. They tied with the Raptors for the best record at home, 34-7, and had the best record on the road, 31-10. Guys that I mentioned earlier in the video were the ones who made the most impact on this team. Chris Paul averaged 18 points, 8 assists, and 5 rebounds per game. He had a PER of 24, which is way higher than the average PER of a player, 15. While Paul played well, he wasn't the main star of this team. there was this other guy named James Harden. Harden would have his first season in his career averaging 30 points per game. He also had 8 assists, 5 rebounds, and 2 steals per game. He played so well that he would win the MVP that season. Harden's PER that season was 30. He doubled the average player's efficiency rating, which is crazy. Clint Capella also had a great season. He averaged 14 points, 10 rebounds, and 2 blocks per game, which is great for a big man. Looking at their team as a whole, the Rockets averaged 112 points per game as a team, which was second in the league. Their opponents averaged 104 points per game, which was 7th. The Rockets were so good that season that at one point they were on a 17-game winning streak. They didn't lose a game for an entire month. From January 28th to March 7th, they never lost a game. I think you guys get it. The Rockets were very talented that season. But unfortunately, things didn't go quite as planned in the playoffs. The playoffs started off strong for Houston. They beat the Timberwolves in 5 games in the first round, then would beat the Jazz in 5 games in the semifinals. Their biggest challenge was the conference finals, where they played the Golden State Warriors. The Rockets were looking good as they were up 3-2 in the series. People believed this Warriors run was finally coming to an end, but little did they know that was not the case. Chris Paul would suffer a hamstring injury which caused for him to miss the rest of the series. This was a big loss for the Rockets. Paul was one of the best playmakers in the league and was a dynamic duo with Harden. Things were going to be difficult without him. The Rockets would lose Game 6, and in Game 7, it was chaos. The Rockets would set the infamous record of missing 27 threes in a row that game. The Rockets went 7 for 44 that game from 3, which is 15%. They were horrendous. The Rockets would end up choking and blowing the series, allowing the Warriors to go to the NBA Finals and defeat the Cavaliers one last time. To conclude this video, here's why the Rockets couldn't pull through and win it all. For one, the team didn't have enough defense. Remember when I discussed the different pieces the Rockets had? Remember what I said their main skill was? It was offense. Ryan Anderson was an offensive beast, but lacked defense. Trevor Ariza was a spot-on shooter, but didn't have the greatest defense. James Harden? No comments. And Mike D'Antoni was mainly an offensive coach. The Rockets team ran through offense. They destroyed the one thing every NBA team, let alone sports team, would follow: defense wins games. Unfortunately, there's only so much offense one team can have, and the Rockets clearly didn't have enough. Game 7 is a prime example of why the Rockets' game plan could fail. Their offense struggled, and they didn't have enough defense to hold on. Another reason why was because of the loss of Chris Paul. Like I said earlier, he was a big piece for this Rockets team. His loss affected the team's play and their momentum. As a Warriors fan, I bet if he played in Game 7, the Rockets would have won, and they would have definitely defeated the Cavs. If the Warriors swept them, the Rockets would have probably done the same. But in the end, this team will always be known as one of the greatest NBA teams to never win the NBA Finals.